You're being sentimental. We'll discuss this again when you're thinking more clearly. That's what my daughter said, right after shutting off my power, gas, and water. Not to mention parading realtors through my house while I sat in the dark kitchen, eating cereal with warm milk like a squatter in my own home. Then I found out she wasn't even keeping the place. No, Laura promised half my estate to her fiancé's failing company. She was trying to buy his bailout with my memories. But what she didn't know was that Eleanor had buried one line in that trust no one expected. And when the lawyer read it aloud in court, everything flipped. You want to know how fast her empire cracked? Keep watching. My name is Walter Merrick and I'm 75 years old. After 4 decades running my small hardware store, I spend my days tending to the home Eleanor and I built together. The oak dining table still gleams with her favorite lemon oil, catching the evening light like it did when she polished it every Sunday. Our old mantel clock tick-tocks through the quiet rooms, marking time since her passing last spring. My daughter Laura, the senior VP at Carter Holdings, barely calls anymore. When she does visit, her corporate smile never quite reaches her eyes. What she doesn't know is that Eleanor made sure our old friend Harris Benson, the sharpest retired attorney in the county, buried something special in that trust paperwork. I always taught Laura that fairness matters more than profit, but somewhere along the way she forgot. Blood runs thicker than water, but money can poison both. I was pouring Laura's coffee when the mantel clock chimed 10. Same rhythm it had kept for 30 years, though these days it mostly counted out the quiet. Laura perched at the oak table, Eleanor's table, looking more like a CEO than my daughter in her charcoal suit and practiced posture. You know that feeling when something's off, but you can't put your finger on it. That's how it felt watching her slide that leather briefcase onto the table. Too deliberate, too smooth. Black, 2 sugars? I asked, though I knew her preference hadn't changed since college. Perfect, Dad. She gave me that smile she'd perfected in boardrooms, all teeth, no warmth. We need to discuss some paperwork. I settled into Eleanor's old chair, the cushion still holding its shape after all these months. Laura's fingernails, manicured to a gleam, clicked against the briefcase latches. I've been reviewing your finances, she said, laying out documents like playing cards. The trust structure isn't optimal for your situation anymore. My coffee cooled untouched as she walked through slides and charts. Corporate jargon flowing smooth as silk. I caught phrases like asset consolidation and simplified management structure, but it wasn't until she reached the last page that the fog cleared. Sign everything over, Dad, or find somewhere else to live. The words hung there, sharp as broken glass. I studied her face, searching for some trace of the little girl who used to help Eleanor bake snickerdoodles in our kitchen. Instead, I found only that rehearsed, calm, that distance she'd learned from too many hostile takeovers. This is our home, Laura, I said quietly. Your mother and I built our lives here. The trust was meant to keep it in the family, not... Times change, she cut me off with a wave of her hand. And your living arrangements will depend on swift cooperation. My hand trembled slightly as I set down my cup. You're talking about throwing me out of my own house. I'm talking about practical solutions. That smile again, sharp enough to cut. The market's favorable right now. We need to act quickly. Remember when I mentioned blood being thicker than water? Well, in that moment it felt like ice in my veins. No. I pushed the papers back across Eleanor's carefully polished oak. I won't sign. Dad, this house isn't just property, Laura. It's where your mother taught you to read, where she planted those rose bushes I used to hide behind, where she... My voice caught. Where she spent her last Christmas. Laura stood, gathering her documents with efficient movements that reminded me of a surgeon packing up instruments. You're being sentimental. We'll discuss this again when you're thinking more clearly. The teacup rattled against its saucer as my hands shook. Not from age, from something deeper, something that ached like betrayal. She clicked her briefcase. Shut, the sound sharp as a judge's gavel. Those measured heel clicks across our hardwood floors, Eleanor had always walked barefoot, said she liked feeling the grain of the wood, ended at our front door. The latch caught with a final click. I sat there, listening to the mantel clock count out the seconds, wondering when exactly my daughter had learned to treat family like a hostile takeover target. The next morning, I reached for the kettle out of habit, 40 years of starting each day with Earl Grey the way Eleanor taught me. But when I flicked the switch, nothing happened. No familiar click, no gentle heating hum, just dead silence. That's when I noticed how quiet the house was. Too quiet. The thermostat display was blank, and that steady refrigerator purr I'd grown used to. Gone. You know that sinking feeling when something's clearly wrong but your mind's still catching up? That's where I was. I tried a light switch. Nothing. Checked the breaker box in the basement. All switches looked normal. My hands weren't quite steady as I dialed the power company. "I'm sorry, Mr. Merrick," the service rep said, sounding genuinely apologetic. "Your account access was transferred last week. We received proper documentation for a power of attorney change. Your daughter authorized service termination yesterday afternoon." My throat went dry. "There must be some mistake. I never authorized. Sir, the paperwork is all in order. You'll need to discuss this with Ms. Carter." The gas company told me the same story. Water would be next, I figured. Laura had somehow gotten her hands on power of attorney papers, probably during one of those routine visits, where she'd asked me to sign updates to my outdated paperwork. I stood in my kitchen, Eleanor's kitchen, where she'd spent 30 years, polishing that oak table every Sunday, keeping the brass fixtures gleaming, making sure everything had its proper place. Now here I was, powerless in my own home. The morning light caught the brass drawer pulls she'd loved so much, but instead of their usual warm glow, they seemed to mock me. You ever feel like the world's tilted sideways and you're the only one who noticed? That's how it felt, sitting there with my bowl of room-temperature milk and cereal, watching afternoon shadows creep across Eleanor's carefully preserved linoleum floor. The mantel clock kept ticking, mechanical, thank God, or Laura would have silenced that too. Each tick felt like a little jab, counting out my helplessness. I spread Laura's documents across the table again, though I could barely make out the fine print in the dimming light. Legal terms jumped out at me. Transfer of assets, immediate possession, voluntary surrender. Voluntary. That word stuck in my craw. Eleanor and I had built this place piece by piece, decision by decision. The mortgage payments that meant no fancy vacations, the careful maintenance that kept everything solid and true, the trust she'd insisted on setting up just to be safe. Now Laura was trying to sweep it all away with a few signatures and some corporate strong-arming. Let me tell you something about being 75. You learn what matters. And sitting there in that dim kitchen listening to Eleanor's clock-mark time, I knew I couldn't let our life's work be erased by our daughter's greed. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was every Christmas morning, every family dinner, every quiet evening Eleanor and I had shared. Giving it up would mean giving up those memories too. My hands weren't shaking anymore when I picked up my phone. I scrolled through old contacts until I found the number I needed. Harris Benson, Eleanor's friend from law school. He'd helped set up the trust back when Laura was still bringing us grandkid drawings for the fridge. Eleanor had always said he was the most thorough lawyer she'd ever known. Harris lived in one of those old Victorian houses where every room felt like a library. When I stepped into his den that afternoon, the smell of leather-bound, books and pipe tobacco wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. Law books lined the walls, and there was his framed bar certificate, dated back to when Eleanor was still in law school. Some folks might have found it imposing, but to me, it just spoke of experience. "Walter," he said, rising from behind a desk that looked like it had witnessed 40 years of legal strategizing. "Eleanor always said you'd only ask for help when you absolutely needed it." His wire-rimmed glasses caught the light as he gestured to a worn leather chair. "Wish I was here under better circumstances, Harris." My voice came out rougher than I'd meant it to. He pulled out a yellow legal pad, uncapped an old fountain pen, the kind Eleanor used to favor, and listened while I laid it all out. Laura's ultimatum, the utility shutoffs, the power of attorney I couldn't remember signing. With each detail, his pen scratched quietly across the paper, his expression growing more focused. "I'll need to see the trust binder," he said when I finished, "and any durable powers of attorney you can find." Eleanor was... He paused, adjusting his glasses. "She was very particular about how we structured things." I pulled out the manila envelope I'd brought from my safe. "Everything's here. Original signatures, amendments, the works." Harris spread the documents across his desk, tracing each line with his pen tip. He murmured, flipping pages. "Yes, here's the anti-duress structure Eleanor insisted on. Clever woman, your wife. Anti-duress. The term was new to me. Protection against exactly this kind of situation. He held up a finger, still reading. Would you happen to have email copies of any recent communications with Laura? Anything documenting these demands? I nodded, pulling out my phone. She's been thorough, sent everything in writing. Forward those to me? He handed me his card. And let me cross-check these amendments against the schedule. Eleanor built in some interesting fail-safes. While he worked, I studied the room. A photograph on his desk caught my eye. Harris and Eleanor at their law school graduation, both grinning like they owned the world. Next to it sat a more recent one, taken at our 40th anniversary party. Eleanor had insisted Harris come, called him the most honest lawyer in 3 counties. Walter, Harris's voice pulled me back. His eyebrows had lifted, and he was studying a handwritten note in the margin of one document. There's something here. A conditional voiding clause, Eleanor had me add. I need to review this carefully. How long? Give me till the end of the week. He gathered the papers carefully. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Just hold your ground. I stood, my knees protesting after sitting so long. Harris, I appreciate... He waved off my thanks. Eleanor was my friend for 40 years. She trusted me to look out for you if anything like this ever happened. He tapped the documents. Let me do my job. Walking out, I caught one last glimpse of him bent over those papers, fountain pen moving steadily, like a surgeon planning a delicate operation. Maybe, just maybe, Eleanor had seen this coming. Maybe she'd left me more protection than I knew. 2 days crawled by like molasses in January before I got Harris's call. Come by this afternoon, he said, and something in his tone made my pulse quicken. I've found what we need. You know that feeling when you're about to hear news that could change everything? That's how my stomach felt as I climbed his porch steps at 3 o'clock sharp. Harris had the trust documents spread across his desk like battle plans. The afternoon sun slanted through his study windows, catching dust motes that danced around those leather-bound law books. I settled into the same chair as before, its familiar creak almost comforting. Walter, Harris began, lifting a particular page. Your Eleanor was brilliant. He tapped a section with his pen. Right here, buried in the fine print, is what we call a voluntary transfer requirement. In simple terms, any transfer of assets must be freely given, if there's evidence of coercion, threats, or duress. He paused, adjusting his wire rims. The entire claim becomes void. My throat went dry. Void, completely null. Laura would lose any chance at control. He leaned forward. But we need to be strategic. Document everything. Save every email, every voicemail. Note down every incident with dates and times. We want a clear pattern of pressure tactics. I thought about the dark house, the silent fridge. The utilities? Perfect example. He was already writing. That's textbook coercion. But here's the key, Walter. Don't confront her. Don't tip our hand. Let her think she's winning. The mantel clock in his study chimed the half-hour, and Harris checked his calendar. We have exactly 3 weeks until the trust review hearing. Judge Harrison's docket has an opening on the 15th. He circled the date. That's our moment, but until then, I have to just take it. The words tasted bitter. I know it's hard. Harris's voice softened. But remember, this is what Eleanor planned for. She knew Laura's tendencies. This clause wasn't an accident. The memory of Eleanor at her desk, poring over these same documents, hit me like a wave. She'd always been the careful one, thinking 10 steps ahead. Even now she was protecting me. 3 weeks, I repeated, straightening my shoulders. I can manage that. Document everything, Harris emphasized again. No matter how small it seems. And Walter? He held my gaze. No confrontations. Let her build the case against herself. I nodded, gathering my coat. The temperature had dropped while we talked, and clouds were gathering outside his windows. As I stepped out onto his front walk, something caught my eye. Glossy papers fluttering on his gate. Real estate flyers. Professional photos of my house, with coming soon, splashed across the top. Then I heard it. Laura's voice, sharp and clear, coming from a parked car at the curb. She was on speakerphone, car door still open. Yes, we can start walkthroughs next week, she was saying. The paperwork's practically done. Just schedule whatever works for you. Dad won't be an issue. My hands clenched, but I remembered Harris's words. Document everything. Don't confront. The car door slammed, and I watched her drive away, those real estate flyers dancing in her wake. Each one showed my home, the gardens Eleanor had planted, the front porch where we'd spent summer evenings, the brass doorknob she'd polished every spring, all of it advertised like some commodity to be traded. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the flyers, then carefully noted the time and date. 3 weeks suddenly felt like an eternity, but Eleanor had given me the tools to fight back. She'd seen this coming, planned for it, protected me even now. I tightened my coat against the chill wind and started the walk home. 3 weeks of documentation, 3 weeks of quiet endurance, 3 weeks until Judge Harrison's courtroom. I could do that, for Eleanor, for the home we'd built, for the trust she'd crafted so carefully. The next week dragged like cold molasses. You ever sit in your own home while strangers walk through it like they already own the place? Let me tell you, it tests a man's patience, something fierce. I kept my post in the kitchen doorway, notepad ready just like Harris advised. The parade started Tuesday morning. A young couple who barely glanced my way, a guy in an expensive suit who measured walls with his phone, and a woman who touched everything like she was pricing yard sale items. The crown molding is original, Laura told them, playing tour guide while I gripped my pen tighter. And of course, we'll have everything cleared out before closing. Everything cleared out. That included me, apparently. I remembered the day Eleanor and I installed that molding. Spring of '82, if memory serves right. She'd held the ladder while I worked the nail gun, and we'd celebrated with lemonade on the porch after. Now Laura was pointing out the dated fixtures we'd need to modernize. You know what's worse than watching somebody plan to gut your home, having to write it all down? But that's exactly what I did, filling page after page with times, dates, and quotes. Harris had been crystal clear. Document everything. When can the seller vacate? The suit guy asked right in front of me, like I was just part of the furniture. Laura's smile could have cut glass. Oh, that won't be an issue. We're just wrapping up some paperwork. I made another note, my hand steady, even though my chest felt tight. The next showing was worse. Some tech entrepreneur type wandered into my study, Eleanor's study really, where she'd graded papers for 30 years, and laughed about converting it to a wine room. "These old bookcases'll have to go," he said, running his fingers along Eleanor's shelves. "But the exposure's perfect for temperature control." That night I sat in the dark study, wrapped in the quilt from our bed. The heater vents whistled with empty air. Laura still hadn't restored the utilities. My phone buzzed with another text from her. "As a tenant at will, your continued obstinance is just delaying the inevitable. Sign the papers." I saved that one too. Harris had a whole file of them now. The cold seeped through the windows, and I found myself wondering if this was really worth it. Maybe dignity meant walking away, finding a small apartment, letting Laura have her victory. The thought sat like lead in my stomach. Then I spotted Eleanor's favorite pen on the desk, one of those fancy cross ones I'd given her for our 30th. She'd used it to grade thousands of papers, to write Christmas cards, to sign the trust that Laura was now trying to break. I pulled out a fresh notepad and clicked that pen. Another showing tomorrow meant more evidence to gather, more proof of coercion, more ammunition for Harris and Judge Harrison. The next morning brought a retired couple who actually acknowledged me. The wife even asked about the garden while Laura was checking something in her phone. "Eleanor planted those roses," I told her, keeping my voice neutral like Harris coached me. "Been blooming every June for 40 years. Laura's head snapped up. "The landscaping will be completely redone, of course," she cut in. "The current arrangement is quite obsolete." I wrote that down too, right there in front of her. Saw her jaw clench when she noticed. Good. Each night got colder as Laura found new ways to turn the screws. The water pressure mysteriously dropped. The internet cut out. But I kept my post in that kitchen doorway. Eleanor's, pen in hand, documenting every smirk, every dismissive comment, every thinly veiled threat. "You're sure about possession timing?" a buyer asked Laura near week's end. She didn't even lower her voice. "Trust me, he'll be gone, one way or another." That one filled up half a page in my notes, even included the exact time, 2:47 p.m., and the way she glanced at me while saying it. I'd station myself in that doorway 100 more times if that's what it took. Each note, each saved text, each recorded conversation was another brick in the wall that would eventually fall right back on Laura. Eleanor had given me the tools. Harris had given me the strategy. All I had to do was stand my ground and keep writing. The next morning I drove downtown to that big retirement complex, Sunny Meadows or Valley View, one of those names that tries too hard to sound cheerful. You know the type. The lobby smelled like someone had tried to cover up institutional cleaning products with fake lavender air freshener. "Can I help you?" The woman at the welcome desk had that practiced smile they all seem to master. "Just looking for some information," I said, trying to sound casual. Like I wasn't there because my own daughter was freezing me out of my home. She handed me a stack of glossy brochures, all showing seniors playing cards or doing water aerobics. Happy people who'd chosen to be there, I supposed. Not folks backed into a corner by their own flesh and blood. Back in my car, I spread the pamphlets across the passenger seat. The monthly fees made my throat tight. They'd eat through my savings in no time, even without Laura trying to grab everything. But it was the pictures of the cozy private gardens that really got to me. Concrete planters with mass-produced petunias. Nothing like Eleanor's. Roses, the ones she'd babied through drought and frost for 4 decades. I remembered how she'd mapped out that garden on graph paper, plotting every bush and bulb. "Gardens need patience," she'd always said. "You can't rush what wants to grow slow." My hands were shaking when I pulled out my phone to call Harris. The ring seemed to go on forever before he picked up. "Walter, everything all right? I don't know if I can keep doing this," I admitted. "Maybe I should just find somewhere else. Start over." The brochures crinkled under my grip. "Hold," Harris said, firm but kind. "We need pattern, not flashes. Each incident builds our case. Remember what Eleanor put in that trust. She knew what she was doing. But will it be enough? Keep documenting. Every text, every utility shutdown, every threat. Pattern, Walter. That's what convinces judges." After hanging up, I sat in that parking lot for a long while, watching happy seniors shuffle in and out of the building. Then I drove home and fired up my old printer. Took me most of the afternoon, but I printed everything. Utility statements showing the sudden account changes, screenshots of Laura's texts, even photos of the real estate flyers she'd scattered around my property. Each page went into a binder with careful labels and timestamps. The house felt especially empty that night, the kind of quiet that makes you hear every tick of the clock, every creak of settling wood. My phone lit up around 11, Laura again. "Consider what comfortable compliance could mean, Dad. A smooth transition, maybe even a nice rental nearby." I forwarded it to Harris before I even finished reading. Evidence, pattern, purpose. Standing at my front door, I pulled out the cloth and polish I've used on that brass doorknob every Sunday. For 30 years. Eleanor used to tease me about it. "Most men wash their cars," she'd say. "My Walter buffs doorknobs." The familiar motion steadied my hands. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Eleanor's garden, her study, her careful planning with that trust. About doing right by the home we'd built together. The mantel clock struck midnight as I finished, each chime like a question. Would the judge see the pattern? Would all this careful documentation matter? Would Eleanor's hidden clause be enough? I watched the second hand sweep around, marking time like it always had. Tick, tick, tick. Patient. Relentless. Just like Eleanor's roses growing outside in the dark. I added Laura's latest text to the binder before heading up to bed. The stairs creaked in all the familiar places, and I ran my hand along the banister Eleanor had stripped and refinished herself one long ago. Summer. Every inch of this house held memories like that. Stories that couldn't be measured in square footage or market value. The clock kept ticking downstairs, counting out the seconds until the hearing. Each one a reminder to hold steady, keep documenting, trust in Eleanor's foresight and Harris's strategy. Pattern, not flashes. Evidence, not emotion. That night, I dreamed of Eleanor tending her roses, knowing that even the strongest blooms need time to show their true colors. The next afternoon I was wiping down the porch rails. Keeping my hands busy helped steady my mind when I heard Laura's BMW pull into the driveway. These days, every time her car showed up, my stomach would knot. But this time she wasn't alone. I recognized her fiancé Martin's voice before I saw him. They were standing by her car, talking in that way people do when they think they're alone. You know how it is when folks forget there might be witnesses around. "The board's getting impatient," Martin was saying. His usual smooth tone had an edge to it. They want concrete timelines. Laura's laugh had that sharp sound I'd gotten used to lately. Relax. Half goes to the company by quarter end. Dad's running out of options. My hand froze on the rail. The rag I'd been using dropped to the floorboards, but I barely noticed. I reached for my phone, hands trembling as I opened the voice recorder app Harris had shown me how to use. The vendors are calling daily, Martin continued. If we can't show them guaranteed capital... It's handled, Laura cut in. Trust me, the old house alone will cover most of the immediate problems. I stood there recording every word, while they laid out their real plan clear as day. This wasn't about inheritance or family legacy. This was about bailing out Martin's failing company with my assets. They talked for another few minutes about board meetings and vendor payments, using the kind of corporate language that always made my head spin. But I got the gist well enough. They needed my signature not for Laura's future, but for Martin's bottom line. I waited until their cars were gone before I called Harris. My voice must have given something away because he said he'd come right over. Listen to this, told him when he arrived, playing back the recording. Harris sat at my kitchen table, making notes while the voices from my phone filled the room. When it finished, he pulled out his laptop. Let me check something, he said, typing quickly. Martin's company is publicly traded. Their filings should be... He paused, scanning the screen. Well, look at these numbers. I leaned in. The balance sheet was a sea of red ink. Massive liabilities, late vendor payments, the works. Harris pointed to one particularly ugly figure. They're practically insolvent, he said, without a major cash injection. He let the sentence hang there. My throat felt dry. They're counting on my signature to save them. Harris nodded slowly. And their investors are probably expecting exactly that, a bailout using your assets. I got up and paced the kitchen, my mind racing. Should we confront them? Let them know we know? No, Harris was emphatic. We stay quiet. Let them think they're still in control. The hearing's our moment, not before. He helped me print out the company's latest financial statements, highlighting the worst parts. Then we went through my phone, finding voicemails from Laura with thinly veiled references to bridging funds post-transfer and stabilizing capital. Looking at my calendar that evening, I counted 11 days until the hearing. 11 more days of this quiet war in my own home. 11 days of pretending I didn't know the full scope of their scheme. I walked through the house that night, touching the familiar walls, wondering what new humiliations they'd cook up before court. The recording of Laura's voice kept playing in my head. Half goes to the company by quarter end. My own daughter, ready to carve up my life's work to save her fiancé's failing business. You think you know someone right up until you don't. I stood at the window watching the streetlights flicker on. A couple walked by with their dog, looking like what neighbors should look like. Normal folks living normal lives. Meanwhile, here I was, gathering evidence against my own child's corporate conspiracy. Harris's parting words echoed in my mind. Don't let on that we know. Not a word, not a hint. Let them play their hand, while we hold our cards close. The next afternoon I was out on the porch, nursing a lukewarm coffee and watching clouds drift over Eleanor's garden. The late October air had that crisp edge that always reminded me of football games and leaf piles. That's when I heard the crunch of tires on my driveway. Laura's silver BMW pulled up, but she stayed inside, engine running. Through my screen door, I could hear her voice sharp and clear on speakerphone. Martin, trust me. Half goes to the company by quarter end. Dad's running out of options. She laughed, that corporate laugh I'd grown to hate. The utilities thing is working perfectly. He'll cave. My coffee cup froze halfway to my mouth. Martin, her fiancé. The tech startup guy she'd been bragging about at Christmas, something about revolutionary payment processing, whatever that meant. The board's breathing down my neck. Martin's voice crackled through the speaker. We need those bridging funds or nothing, Laura cut in. Dad signs, we transfer, your investors calm down, simple. I set my cup down as quietly as I could and pulled out my phone. Harris had shown me how to record audio clips, thank God. My finger shook slightly as I hit the button. Quarter end is tight, Martin said. The vendors are getting antsy, I know, but Dad's estate is worth 7. Figures easy. More than enough to cover everything until the new funding round. My stomach lurched. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. They were planning to raid my estate to prop up some failing company. Laura's car backed out a few minutes later. I waited until she was gone before calling Harris. "Get over here," I said. "You need to hear something." Harris arrived within the hour, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the afternoon sun as he listened to the recording. Then he pulled out his laptop and started digging through public filings. "Well, well," he murmured, turning the screen so I could see. "Look at Martin Keaton's company financials." The balance sheet made my head spin. Red numbers everywhere. Late vendor payments, mounting liabilities, something called contingent obligations that looked like a bomb waiting to go off. "They're underwater," Harris said, scrolling through more documents. "Betting on your signature to save them." I sank into my chair. All this pressure. It wasn't even about Laura wanting the house. She's trying to funnel my assets into his sinking ship. "And his investors think your estate will bail them out." Harris adjusted his glasses. "This changes things, Walter. Makes the coercion case even stronger. Should we confront them?" "Absolutely not." Harris closed his laptop firmly. "We stay quiet. Let them think they're winning. The hearing's our chance to present everything at once." I nodded, moving to my desk to print copies of the company's financial statements. While the printer hummed, I checked my voicemail. Sure enough, there was a message from Laura from last week. "Once the transfer's complete, we can bridge those funds immediately." I added the transcript to our growing file. Harris helped me organize everything before he left. 11 days, he said, tapping the calendar on my wall. "Just 11 more days of this, Walter." After he drove off, I stood in my study, wondering what other humiliations Laura and Martin had planned for the home stretch. The room still smelled faintly of Eleanor's lemon furniture polish, and for a moment I could almost hear her voice. "Patience, old bear. Justice takes its own sweet time." I opened the binder where we'd collected everything. The utility shutoffs, the real estate harassment, the threatening texts. Now I added the new pieces: Laura's driveway confession, Martin's company financials, the voicemail about bridging funds. The whole ugly picture laid out in black and white. 11 days suddenly felt like 11 years. But I thought of Eleanor's roses again, how she'd wait through winter, pruning and planning, knowing spring would eventually come. I just had to do the same. Wait. Document. Endure. Though I had to wonder, what else would they try before the hearing? What new schemes were brewing in those corporate minds, so sure of their clever trap? The next afternoon, I was sorting through more paperwork on the porch swing, Eleanor's favorite spot for catching the late sun, when I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. Laura's sleek BMW pulled up, but she stayed inside, phone pressed to her ear. The engine idled as her voice carried through her cracked window. I reached for my own phone, remembering Harris's instructions about documenting everything. "Martin, honey, I've got it under control," she was saying. "Yes, I know the board's getting anxious, but Dad's running out of options." A pause. "Of course, I'm sure half goes to the company by quarter end. That'll more than cover the immediate holes." My finger hit record as my stomach dropped. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. She was promising my assets to someone else. "The investors won't wait?" Another pause. "Well, remind them that once we have control of the estate, their patience will pay off. Just keep them calm for 2 more weeks." I sat there perfectly still as pieces clicked into place. The aggressive timeline, the utility shutoffs, the constant pressure. It wasn't just Laura being greedy. She was desperate to deliver something to her fiancé's company. Soon as her car pulled away, I called Harris. "I need you to look into Martin Keaton's business," I said. "Something's not right." "Already on it," Harris replied. "After your daughter's last visit, I pulled some public filings. You'd better come over." 20 minutes later, I was in Harris's study, staring at financial statements that made my construction company's old balance sheets look like child's play. Martin's tech firm was hemorrhaging cash, with vendor payments months late and credit lines maxed out. "Look at these liability numbers," Harris pointed with his pen. "They're practically insolvent, unless they get their hands on my estate," I finished. The room seemed to tilt sideways. "They're planning to use my home, my savings, everything, to bail out his failing company." Harris nodded grimly. "And I'd bet those investors of his are counting on exactly that. Your signature is their safety net." I thought about all those real estate walkthroughs, the casual way Laura talked about swift possession. She wasn't planning for her future. She was scrambling to save her fiancé's skin. We should confront them, I said, my voice rough. Let them know we've figured it out. Harris shook his head. That would be a mistake. Right now, they're overconfident. Sloppy. Let them keep talking, keep leaving evidence. The hearing's our moment, not before. He was right, of course. The same way Eleanor had been right about putting that protection clause in the trust. Had she somehow seen this coming? Known our daughter might someday try to strip everything bare. Back home, I printed copies of Martin's company's latest balance sheet. The numbers were staggering. The kind of debt that could swallow a family's legacy whole. I added it to my growing evidence binder, along with transcripts of 3 voicemails Laura had left, all mentioning bridging funds post-transfer. The calendar on my desk showed 11 days until the hearing. 11 more days of real estate agents traipsing through my rooms. 11 days of cold showers and takeout meals, of watching Laura measure my home for someone else's furniture. I picked up the brass letter opener Eleanor had given me on our 20th anniversary. For opening new chapters, she'd said with that gentle smile of hers. Now I wondered what chapters were left to open, what fresh humiliations waited between now and the courthouse steps. My phone buzzed. Another text from Laura. Dad, the utility company can restore service today if you'll just be reasonable. I added it to the binder without replying. Let her think she was wearing me down. Let her keep building the pattern Harris needed. Let her and Martin plan their corporate rescue with my life's work. Sitting in Eleanor's chair by the cold fireplace, I could almost hear her voice. Patience, love. Sometimes you have to let people show exactly who they are. Harris stood there like he was teaching a college class, calm and methodical as he walked the judge through that buried clause. You know how sometimes the simplest things carry the most weight? That's what it felt like watching him point to those initials Eleanor and I had scrawled years ago. Each mark on that paper felt like a message from my wife, reaching across time to protect our home. If we turn to section 4.3.b, Your Honor, Harris said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, you'll find explicit language voiding any transfer achieved through coercion or duress. Both parties initialed this provision specifically. I couldn't help but notice how the afternoon light slanted through those tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the oak benches. Reminded me of all those evenings Eleanor and I spent reading contracts at our kitchen table, making sure everything was just right. Laura's attorney jumped up like someone had stuck him with a pin. Your Honor, my client categorically denies any coercion. This is a simple matter of voluntary transfer with parental consent. I watched Laura lean forward in her chair, that corporate mask of hers firmly in place. Dad's simply misinterpreting standard business procedures, she said, her voice carrying that same smooth tone she used in board meetings. Everything was meant to streamline the process. Harris didn't miss a beat. He lifted the utility notices one by one, laying them out like cards in a poker hand. Streamlining, Your Honor? These show systematic service cut-offs within days of Mr. Merrick's refusal to sign. No prior notice, no discussion, just immediate pressure tactics. The judge, older woman, sharp eyes behind reading glasses, studied each document. Miss Carter, she said, explain to me why you arranged property showings before obtaining your father's signature. I shifted my gaze to the gallery where Martin, Laura's fiancé, sat with 2 men in expensive suits. Have you ever watched someone try to maintain a poker face while their world starts crumbling? Martin kept glancing at those investors, his fingers drumming against his knee faster and faster. The judge laid her pen down and straightened the papers before her. The sound of shuffling documents seemed to fill the whole courtroom. I will rule after one final clarification, she announced. Let me tell you, friend, time does funny things in moments like that. The tick of the courtroom clock seemed to stretch like taffy. My hand found the edge of the bench, gripping old oak that felt solid as truth itself. The same truth Eleanor and I had built our lives on. Laura sat perfectly still, but I could see her shoulder blades pressing against her tailored jacket. That controlled breathing she'd learned in executive training wasn't quite doing its job anymore. Harris remained standing, one hand resting lightly on our evidence binder, patient as a man who knows he's played his cards exactly right. Through those tall windows, I caught a glimpse of clouds sliding past, casting shadows that danced across the courthouse floor. Reminded me of all those afternoons Eleanor and I spent watching the same kind of shadows move across our garden. We'd built something real together, something no amount of corporate maneuvering could erase. The silence stretched tight as a wire. Every eye in that courtroom was fixed on the judge as she studied one last document, her expression giving away nothing. My fingers pressed harder against the bench's edge, feeling the grain of that old wood. In that moment, I swear I could hear Eleanor's voice in my head clear as day. "Patience, Walter. Truth holds longer than schemes." The judge lifted her gaze from that last document, and I swear the whole courtroom held its breath. "Having reviewed the evidence presented," she began, her voice carrying that weight only truth delivers, "I find clear and convincing proof of a systematic pattern of coercion." My shoulders, which had been carrying what felt like years of tension, started to loosen their grip on my spine. But the judge wasn't finished. The trust's anti-duress clause is both valid and triggered by these actions. Therefore, all claims by Laura Carter against the estate are hereby voided. Mr. Merrick retains full control of his assets and property. She punctuated this with a sharp rap of her gavel. Harris gave me that slight nod we'd practiced, the signal that everything had landed exactly as planned. You know that feeling when a weight you've carried so long suddenly lifts? It's like learning to stand up straight all over again. But Harris wasn't done. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out another set of documents. "Your Honor, I'd like to file these supplemental notices for the record. They contain public records pertaining to severe financial liabilities carried by Keaton Enterprises." Martin, Laura's fiancé, jerked forward in his seat like someone had yanked his strings. The two investors with him were already pulling out laptops, fingers flying across keyboards. "The court accepts these filings," the judge said, and, just like that, the whispers started. I watched one of the investors, grey suit, expensive watch, lean over to study his colleague's screen. The numbers scrolling past told a story that no amount of smooth talking could polish. Years of running my own business taught me to read faces during tough meetings. These men weren't just concerned, they were seeing disaster in plain digits. "Current debt-to-asset ratio exceeds," the first investor muttered just loud enough to carry. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. The second investor snapped his laptop shut with a click that sounded like a vault locking. Without a word to Martin, he stood and walked straight out of the gallery. Remember that corporate mask Laura always wore? It cracked right there in front of everyone. Her face flushed red as the truth hit from both sides. She'd lost the legal fight, and her fiancé's business facade was crumbling in real time. All those years of polished presentations and boardroom confidence couldn't hide this moment. The judge's voice cut through the murmurs. "This court is adjourned." The gavel came down one final time. I stood slowly, feeling oddly light. Beside me, Harris was already tucking papers into his briefcase with that methodical care I'd come to trust. Laura shoved her chair back. The screech of wood on wood made heads turn, and practically threw herself at the courtroom door. It banged against the wall as she stormed into the hallway. You ever notice how victory doesn't always feel like you expect? Standing there in that courtroom, watching my daughter flee from the truth, I felt more tired than triumphant. The wooden panels on the walls had that same warm glow as my study at home. Funny how your mind catches these details in big moments. Martin scrambled after Laura, leaving his briefcase behind. The remaining investor was already on his phone, speaking in low, urgent tones about immediate risk assessment and exposure limitations. The afternoon sun slanted through those tall windows, casting long shadows across the now empty gallery seats. Harris touched my elbow gently. "Ready to go home, Walter?" Home. Just that one word carried the weight of everything we'd fought for. I nodded, feeling the strength of that old oak bench under my palm one last time before we turned to leave. The courtroom clock ticked steadily, marking time just like my mantel clock at home, the one Eleanor used to wind every Sunday evening without fail. I walked home through streets going purple with twilight, while Harris headed back to his office to file the final paperwork. Behind me, those investors who'd come expecting a quick fix to their money, problems drifted toward the parking garage elevators in silence. Funny how quiet follows after big moments, isn't it? Like the world needs to catch its breath. The air had that crisp edge that comes just before full dark, carrying the scent of someone's fireplace a few blocks over. My footsteps echoed off the old brownstones. Steady, unhurried, no need to rush anymore. Time was mine again. You know, I couldn't help thinking about Laura as I walked. The look on her face when it all came apart, I'd never seen anything like it. She'd lost twice in the space of 10 minutes. First, watching her careful legal trap spring backward, voiding her claim to everything she'd tried to steal. Then, right on its heels, seeing her fiancé's business facade crumble in front of those investors. Must have felt like the floor dropping out twice. The streetlights were just starting to flicker on when I reached my gate. Our gate, Eleanor's and mine. The hinges let out that familiar squeak she'd always meant to oil but never did. "Lets us know when someone's coming," she used to say with that practical smile of hers. Standing there on my own porch, and yes, it was mine again, legally and morally, I felt something settle inside me, like pieces of a broken cup finding their way back together. I reached for the brass doorknob, the one Eleanor had, polished every Sunday after church, right along with the silver. My fingers found those smooth spots where decades of hands had worn the metal bright. That doorknob held more history than Laura ever understood. It had welcomed my wife home with our newborn daughter. It had turned under Eleanor's grip through 47 years of Sundays, through celebrations and sorrows, and now it sat solid and sure under my palm, a symbol of everything we'd built and everything I'd managed to protect. The key turned with that solid click I'd missed during those weeks of uncertainty. Inside, everything waited exactly as it should be. The foyer held that hint of lemon oil Eleanor had always used on the wainscoting. Light from the street lamps filtered through the front windows, laying familiar patterns across the hardwood floor. And there it was, the steady heartbeat of our home. That mantel clock Eleanor's father had given us as a wedding present ticked away, marking ordinary time again. No more counting down to deadlines or court dates. Just the simple measure of moments passing as they should. I closed the door behind me, and the latch caught with a quiet certainty that nearly brought tears to my eyes. The house seemed to exhale around me, settling back into itself. All those weeks of tension, of strangers tramping through with clipboards and dollar signs in their eyes, dissolved in that moment. Our wedding photo still hung in its spot of honor, Eleanor's smile as bright as the day it was taken. Looking at it now, I could almost hear her voice, could almost see her shaking her head at everything that had happened. She'd known, hadn't she? Known enough to work that protective clause into the trust with Harris, like she was reaching through time to shield our home from greed's grabbing hands. The words rose up then, natural as breathing, and I spoke them into the quiet foyer, to Eleanor's smiling photo, to the house that had held our life together. Greed buries love faster than death ever could. The mantel clock ticked its agreement, and somewhere down the block a dog barked at the rising moon. I stood there in my own front hall, keeper once again of every memory these walls contained, and let the peace of it wash over me. The brass doorknob gleamed softly in the evening light, standing guard just as it always had, just as it always would.